Taxes! A mandatory duty that we're all forced to pay to the government for whatever the hell the government decides to do with the tax dollars. However, not everyone would like to pay taxes for things that they don't even care about at all, especially me. Here, I'm going to be discussing why taxation is not just theft, but also armed robbery as well, and why I believe taxation should be completely abolished. In fact, I'm convinced that without the use of taxes, it could potentially benefit a lot of people and definitely allow them to have way more money in their piggy banks than how the government takes away at least a quarter of their income the civilians have earned. But before I dive into deep detail on exactly why taxation is literally armed robbery, I'd like to introduce you to the Revolutionary War, to which their primary motive behind the war is a simple taxation on imported goods, leading up to how the United States to think it's acceptable to steal a majority of what we earned in our piggy banks. So let's put on a disguise so the IRS doesn't find. Wait, what? No, I did pay my taxes, sir. I swear, I'm on my best behavior. No! So before the Revolutionary War started, the colonists who arrived to what became known as the United States were apparently occupied and oppressed under the rule of Britain. Britain has aggressively imposed an immense amount of taxes onto the colonists, like how kidnappers hold children ransom against innocent families. Act after act, the colonists were so exhausted after being forced to pay even 1% of taxes to Britain that they have enough with Britain's shenanigans. To seek vengeance, the colonists smeared tar onto pro-tax retards and shoved them into feathers, transforming them into deformed bird monsters, which is incredibly hilarious as hell. You know what? We should flood the IRS buildings with tar and transform the agents into bird skinwalker NPCs for forcing us to pay way more taxes than how the colonists were forced to pay less than 1% of taxes to Britain. That'd be funny, you know. Anyways, in 1770, during the Boston Massacre, armed British henchmen murdered some of the colonists for scolding them for occupying Boston, to which Britain downplayed the entire incident, claiming to be completely innocent while portraying the colonists as Lucifer's pure evil parasites just because the colonists refused to pay a pebble of tax. And in the Boston Tea Party, colonists disguised themselves as Native Americans where they would snatch tea and other products, throwing them in the sea for hungry sharks to destroy in retaliation against Britain once again. This is what real patriots do, in contrast to today's society. And the Declaration of Independence was written by the Founding Fathers as a huge fuck you to Britain for oppressing them and bringing in leeches to harass the colonists who just want to seek freedom and independence, unlike today's society once again. As a result, British parasites and the colonists fought against each other for nearly a decade, all over Britain, forcing them to pay 1% of tax, to which eventually, in the end of the day, Britain surrendered and allowed colonists to form the United States of America, as well as seeking independence, yada yada. I won't be going over the details of the Revolutionary War, since that's not exactly what I'm interested in talking about, just that the motive behind the Revolutionary War was a 1% tax, to which unfortunately led to government-drone cockroaches wearing the flesh of their victims from both sides of the spectrum to increase a large amount of taxes and allow Mossad to control the world, to which the colonists would have their heads turn red and steam fuming from their ears as a betrayal to what the colonists have fought for, liberty. Eventually, the Revolutionary War has proven that even 1% of taxation is straight up extortion, which brings to my next point on why I believe taxation is utterly armed robbery and extortion. So apparently, taxation is not just theft, but also armed robbery as well, because it involves a bunch of tax-rotted specimen pulling out a Glock against your forehead and stealing stuff that belongs to you non-consensually. Taxation is literally like when you're able to finally afford a house just for some retarded degenerative power to destroy your house with a wrecking ball, just because of some lazy hobo rat who's homeless for refusing to work to promote equality. Note that I'm aware that there's a lot of hardworking people that ended up homeless due to other unfortunate circumstances such as job loss, but there's definitely a lot of people who are willing to find the laziest way possible that want to dump up in the riverbed. So yes, taxation is extortion because they are holding you at gunpoint and will blackmail you to pay taxes or you will end up in prison even though you are not willing to pay at all. Thus, it's the exact equivalent to ransom. If taxes seem fine to you as long as taxes get utilized to get what you want as a form of necessary evil, well, think again. Just because you're fine with a bit of tax doesn't mean that the others are fine with it. That's mainly because taxation literally affects everyone whether they like it or not. Like, do you want to be confronted with a life and death situation along with your friend, where you would either have to donate to the cause of manufacturing rabid mosquito smugglers that would drag us to become a slave cast to Somalian fraud cartels that just lounge around and do nothing at all, or have a bullet speed through your skull? You may be fine with donating to the aggressor with the gun out of safety, but your friend wouldn't be fine at all. That's exactly why taxation affects everyone, cause you may be fine with taxation, but the others aren't. In the supposed land of the free, we're eventually held at ransom to allow the government to rob the hard work we earn. This isn't fucking freedom, nor it is fair at all. This is 100% oppression, literally just like exactly what the colonists despised with a burning passion before forming the United States. You notice that a lot of libertarians use their common phrase that taxation is theft. Well, theft is a broad term that refers to thieves stealing your stuff that doesn't belong to them. I'd consider it as armed robbery instead of just theft, because armed robbery is a specific type of theft that involves thieves pulling out a threat against you under the pressure that you'd be forced to give up your stuff to these pathogenic leeches in exchange of them sparing your life. Like I mentioned earlier, that's like the IRS forcing you to pay taxes to them at gunpoint in exchange of them not locking you up behind bars, which technically counts as armed robbery. So eventually, taxation is not just theft, but straight up armed robbery. The most common excuse I hear from those that try to justify taxation is that taxes help fund government services to provide healthcare, housing, roads, yada yada. Well, it's nice to see that the government is able to provide these services as a way to aid those that don't have enough to afford, but that's unfortunately done in unethical ways. Like, if you want to fund them yourself, then go ahead, that's on you. But do not force me to fund them against my will. What if I don't want to use the roads they're constructing? The solution shouldn't involve pressuring us at gunpoint to pay taxes to fund the government with stuff that some people may potentially not use at all. Here's the thing. I'm convinced that there's a lot of volunteers who are willing to fund charities and other aid organizations without the use of extortion. So it's incredibly ridiculous to steal away from those without their consent in order to fund welfare that you probably don't want to have involvement in via forcing you to donate to them. Like I said, volunteers exist. That's exactly why it should be optional to fund these welfare services via volunteers. It truly would be the land of the free if we're not forced to perform all these civic duties. Would you like it if you don't leave a small tip on the table after dinner and unhinged waiter chases after you with a chainsaw just because you don't want to put a tip on the table after paying for dinner? An extremely fucking retarded argument I heard from NPCs who believe that taxation is necessary to offer society and services is that, actually, if even one person doesn't contribute to society, the entire system collapses into pieces. Oh, shut the fuck up. That argument is utterly invalid because someone else who's willing to pay an extra tip to the services can help take that person's place into funding those services, or that someone else could have helped pay after using the service they desire, so that the person who refuses to pay taxes doesn't affect the services collapsing. It's a win-win solution for everyone. The pro-tax cockroaches are only using that moronic argument as a strategy to gaslight you into believing that if you're not willing to be robbed by an elite gang of power-hungry behemoth blobs, it would be the end of the world. But think of the children! Then again, volunteers and those willing to donate to charity exist. I actually wouldn't even have a problem with social welfare at all if it was funded by volunteers willing to contribute instead of via taxes. So yes, eventually, the services and welfare system that the government provides should be optional to be funded by volunteers instead of these deranged parasites leeching off of you at ransom to pay taxes to them. Taxation is necessary to contribute to society actually exploits the system and awards laziness. If you believe that funding government services via taxes instead of just simply making it voluntary is still justified because paying taxes is necessary to contribute to society to become a lobotomized sheep part of the hive mind. Well, it allows leeches to exploit the tax system in order to get what they want, considering that they want to do the least amount of work possible. The Somalian frauds in Minnesota. You see, without social security and other shit like that, they're allowed to capitalize on the welfare system and get what they want without facing any consequences, while the rest of us suffer because of them. A huge problem I have with universal basic income is that while it could potentially benefit those with low income, it would also require way more taxes to pay in order to give it to those who need that said universal basic income. Like, what the fuck is the point of universal basic income if the same government drones would just steal away that universal basic income via taxes? So apparently, it's literally just a scam at this point, basically like an insufferable filthy ghoul who's gifting you some bread to eat just to take away that same bread. You have to pay even more to tax businesses to have them file taxes for you. Here, I believe that society can still operate without the use of taxes. It just happens that we've been deluded into thinking that without taxes, everything will crumble. Not only would volunteers funding welfare services without the use of tax benefit everyone more, but that there are definitely other alternative options for those that are willing to help operate these services that don't involve forcing everyone to pay a large portion they work hard for. Like, it doesn't have to be just money, literally any other option for those willing to donate to keep these services running or ran by a non-profit charity of volunteers. However, I'm convinced that there's a large portion of people, especially lazy leftists with performative empathy, that think that we should blackmail people to pay taxes to the government to give it to them, which they don't deserve at all, for literally doing nothing but slouch and mouth and all these pathetic protests. Saying that taxation is necessary to contribute to society is like saying that rape is necessary to reproduce offspring to grow the human population. Anyways, taxes are unnecessary to contribute to society because there are actually more ethical ways to keep these services and the system to run in society. Let's imagine a scenario where we all live in a perfect utopian society where we all get along and have affordable, comfortable lives. No poverty, no crime, no bullying, no discrimination, no drugs, no evil corporations, yada yada. Everyone in this city is extremely satisfied with their experience in this perfect city and able to pass beyond their necessities, living in luxury homes and cars. It's a win-win solution for everyone here. But in order to run this actually perfect utopia, the cost involves a child trafficking operation running in secret where predators take advantage of children on a certain island where children get tortured horrifically and experience the horrors on this nightmarish hellhole. So, would you agree to live in this perfect utopian society where everyone gets along and nothing terrible happens in this city at the unfortunate cost of a child trafficking operation ran by the most vile, disgusting predators behind the closet? I hope your answer to this scenario is an absolute huge no. That's why we should look for ethical ways to run welfare services and other shit instead of the government robbing your wallet. Next thing is that paying taxes to the government would also allow the government to become more corrupt and greedy with how they utilize the tax they receive via extortion. Especially with how recently, the government from both sides of the spectrum use the tax dollars to donate to Israel, with the potential of their greatest ally to become a fucking superpower if the American government continues to leech tax dollars from us and betraying what makes them truly American in the first place. You get a lot of pro-tax NPC roaches that will lick the toilet seats of the government and trust everything the government says, like legal positivists. They delude themselves into thinking that the government would actually use the tax money to provide universal healthcare and build roads. But in reality, these worm behemoths would obviously just raise their salary by 1000% or give them away to illegal migrants in the Trojan horse, or secretly giving the rest away to their greatest ally who was promised to these corrupt politicians 3,000 years ago. They don't give a shit about us, only caring about their power and corruption that has been happening for decades. Then again, the government shouldn't make us pay taxes no matter what, since volunteers could just help fund and donate these services to operate. Like the government implemented various types of taxes such as sales tax, income tax, property tax, etc., which just shows how fucking greedy the government is. Pour battery acid onto these corrupt politician ghouls and feed them to these man-eating crocodiles. Another reason to exactly why taxation is armed robbery, since besides the government robbing us, they use these tax dollars to not help us or society, but to absorb themselves more power to abuse and sending that money to bureaucrats or a foreign nation that has nothing to do with us at all. Another thing about taxes is that using socialism for equal distribution of wealth doesn't actually promote equality, but instead makes everything more expensive, thus resulting in inflation. The problem to solving the issues regarding capitalism is not replacing the entire system with socialism, which just makes everything else worse. Why is socialism worse than capitalism? Well, not only does socialism require you to pay way more taxes than you've already been forced to as a way to distribute equal wealth, but it also gives the government more power to regulate the economy and control us like worthless serfs even more. Socialism results in a more authoritarian state that restricts your freedom to do whatever you want, even if it doesn't hurt anyone. Thus, socialism creates more oppressive regimes than capitalism, like how you should solve wildfires by pouring in tons of gallons of gasoline. Not only does replacing capitalism with socialism force you to pay more taxes and make the government more authoritarian with more regulation power, but giving the government more power to regulate the economy allows the government to give monopolies and other greedy corporations more power to exploit. You see, majority of people around the world don't actually understand what capitalism is, so they just mistaken corporatism for capitalism instead. The simple definition for capitalism is just free markets. We should allow people to run small businesses in free markets whenever they want without regulation or taxes, especially the requirement for the government's approval to force you to pay for a business license. Free markets are good because they give anyone the opportunity to start their own business. What people are actually complaining about is corporatism, not capitalism. Because corporatism, or better yet, corporatocracy, involves actually exploiting workers for their own advantage and profit, as well as forming monopolies that eradicate small businesses from the competition. With socialism, not only does the government disapprove small businesses from entering the competition, but allow monopolies to grow even bigger and promote corporatism. Those that support socialism are just allowing the government to become its own monopoly at this point, like they are hive-minded sheep cultists wanting their boyfriend the government to restrict everything.
Bad! The government is my boyfriend! Bad!
And another thing to note is that if governments were to tax massive corporations, soulless corporate drones such as Amazon and Meta would just eventually raise the prices of their products even more, leading to inflation and get more people to push the blame on capitalism. Eventually, as you can see, the economy is draining downhill as the result of the government's corruption and power, allowing greedy monopolies to thrive even further and raise their prices, which is why we shouldn't give the government power to regulate the economy. Which leads to my next argument of how a bunch of pro-tax morons think that taxing the rich would eventually solve all their problems. Well, initially, I kinda thought that taxing billionaires would somewhat help solve poverty and other issues, but looking into more detail, I'm convinced that if billionaires get taxed, they just eventually move out to somewhere to avoid paying taxes or other loopholes to bypass. Literally, the entire goal of billionaires is to maintain their profits as much as possible, so like I said a bit ago, taxing billionaires and massive corporations would eventually just result in them increasing the price of their products drastically. Thus, taxing billionaires and corporate boss would actually increase taxes on us because corporations would just make everything more expensive, plus a huge addition to even more taxes to the consumer. However, I wish that there are other ways where billionaires aren't able to exploit the system, but the solution isn't to taxes because it just makes it worse for us. In fact, there's a likely chance that most middle-class families could potentially become millionaires, and that even the poor could become at least upper middle-class families if it weren't for taxes or billionaires. Here's the thing, if billionaires are able to find loopholes to avoid paying taxes and increase the price of their products to earn more profit, leaving us to pay more taxes, we just become even poorer because of the latter and how around at least half of our income gets stolen via taxes. With that being said, I don't have any respect for billionaires, nor do I have respect for extreme socialists as well for wanting the government to force us to pay taxes. And that taxing billionaires actually increase taxes for all of us as well. Another stupid argument I hear is that if you don't want to pay taxes, you should just move out. Well, you could try to move out as much as you can, even in the most remote island possible. But the government will always stalk you like how fucking Palantir spies on everyone and everything around the world. You can move out to a forest and build a cabin all you want, yada yada. But you will get a 5-star wanted level and the government will always track you down no matter where you go, all over refusing to pay taxes. This just proves how fucking obsessed the government is with you, all over something so small and pathetic, blatantly just insulting these ghouls' fragile egos. But anyways, I don't really think this needs much explanation to why moving out won't really solve anything, since the government will still force you to pay taxes regardless of where you go. Eventually, to round this all up, yes, I stand by that taxation is 100% armed robbery, because the government can just press a Glock to your goddamn head if you refuse to donate to their services, when the volunteers could have actually helped give the money away to these services to operate. The American government has eventually evolved to become the one abomination that the colonists and founding fathers would absolutely despise: taxes, as well as betraying their own country. Replacing capitalism with socialism would just result in not only more taxes, but also giving the government more power to abuse, allowing monopolies to thrive and put small businesses out of the competition. If you tax billionaires and massive corporate ghouls, they just find loopholes to avoid paying taxes or increase the price of their products. So if the government taxes the rich, we'd have to pay more taxes, thus making us even poorer. So yeah, taxation is straight up armed robbery and considered legal extortion, and all this shit needs to be abolished down the abyss for good. So see ya.